This is the free audiobook of Elemental Power, written and read for you by April Ames. Trigger warning. This chapter of the fantasy novel Elemental Power has scenes which could be disturbing to some listeners, particularly survivors of ritualistic abuse. This book is not for children. Listener discretion is advised. Part 1. Shattered. Chapter 1. To the Pain. Sweet oblivion faded, and sensation returned with an unwelcome rush. I was naked. I could tell that instinctively. Naked and buried beneath a pile of rotting leaves. Footsteps. That's what had woken me. I could have slept forever. Could have tumbled down that soft slope of hypothermia into delicious nothingness. It's what I had wanted. I groaned as I felt death slipping away. My head throbbed, and I moved my hands to clutch at it. Matted, sticky hair clung to my skull like seaweed. I buried my frozen fingers until I found the scalp, pressing hard to stop the pounding. The footsteps drew nearer, slowly, gravel crunching. They stopped. By the Watchers, it's a woman. His voice ripped through the silence and through my skull. I covered my face with blood-stained hands and curled into myself, trying to become smaller and disappear. The smell of my own fear intermingled with that of the rotting leaves I lay shivering beneath in a fetid bouquet. Agony pulsed through every dimension of my existence. I needed to see who was out there and tried to open my eyes, but they wouldn't cooperate. The lashes were fused together somehow, and no amount of effort would part them. Moving my face hurt too much to try harder. Bits and pieces of the last few hours came rushing back to memory as an owl hooted in the distance. Here, take my cloak. A blanket of warmth swept over me, and I felt long fingers tucking in the fabric. The heat of his body remained in the thick wool, and the contrast of that warmth against my stone-cold skin made me break into a fit of shivers. I straightened out of the fetal position carefully, intending to rise, but it hurt, so I stopped. Tears welled up in response to the pain and began to soften the crust around my eyelids. Finally, the lashes unglued a bit, and I peeked through my fingers to find a tall, lean man with immense concern on his angular features, crouching down beside me. "Are you all right?" "No," I said through chattering teeth. He stared at me in silence. The hoot of the owl made me jump, pan-flashing fire through every nerve ending. I sat up quickly in reflex and felt myself break. The pain was so overwhelming that I nearly vomited on the man's boots. My vision went white, and I almost passed out. "Is there anything I can do to help?" He startled when the owl hooted again, nearer now. I felt him flinch. I reached over to find the empty bucket I'd taken with me from the water, wishing for even the sulfur and death liquid that had filled it. My tongue was swollen, and my stomach rumbled. "Do you have any water or food?" I clutched the cloak to myself, trembling. He sighed. "I have some wine." "I'll take it," I croaked. My stomach tied itself in a knot at the mention, and I drained the wooden flask he handed me in 3 gulps. Its warmth soothed as it gathered in my belly, easing the rumbling somewhat. "You're hurt," he said. I tried to shoot him a withering glance, but my eyelids were still sealed shut. "Where am I?" I heard him spit, then felt a soft cloth wiping my eyelids. He removed the dried blood that remained until I could see him clearly. He took back the empty flask and looked me over, observing my swollen, battered face and the 4-inch-long slit across my throat. "The Eastern Lands," he said. "Where did you come from? What's your name?" Those basic questions shouldn't have come as such a shock, but panic gripped me as I realized I didn't have the answers. I don't know." I swallowed hard, forcing back the bile-tinged wine that crept up my gullet. "I can't remember anything." "Come on, then," he said. "I have a warm house and food just a short distance from here, if you think you can make it." I smiled and tasted blood. Yes, it was a struggle to stand while holding the cloak tightly around me. An extraordinarily charming smile transformed his features from pointy and flat-lipped to reassuring in an instant. He offered his hand to help me up. I hesitated, taking a few moments to remind myself that he could have killed me where I lay without offering me wine first. He probably wouldn't hurt me. I heard the owl again. It had followed me, perhaps hoping I'd suddenly morph into a tiny rodent, or maybe just biding his time. A few more minutes under the leaves, and I would have made a satisfying meal. As I began to rise, I felt a stab in my side that stopped me short. My ribs must be broken. The man held his hand out to help me, and his fingertips brushed my arm. "Don't touch me," I snapped. I fell back into the leaves and shivered. He pulled his hand back, but remained where he was. I didn't want to feel a man's hands on me, not just yet. Movement caused 100 scabbed slices in my skin to break open and bleed. I could just see them in the dim light, a vibrant red against skin tinged yellow by the evening sun. Finally, I managed to stand on my own and took a tentative step. I stumbled and fell, but he caught me before I struck the earth. "My apologies," he said, pulling back again after setting me upright. No, it's all right. It hadn't been so bad. His touch wasn't fueled by lust or hate. He only wanted to help. I decided to let him. He held his arm out to me for support, and we began to shuffle down a well-worn path. I glanced up at his face and profile and was startled to see that the tip of his ear formed a point. I brought a hand up to examine my own ear and felt a gentle curve, scabbed on newly shredded edges. I gritted my teeth. Even my ears were bloody. My rescuer was more than a foot taller than I was, but even with the disparity in height, he made a useful crutch. He had a prominent nose, but not too large for his face. The corners of his mouth were turned downward, his gaze concentrating on the path ahead. His hair fell to the middle of his neck in tumbled curls backlit by the sunset. I stumbled as my bare toes smashed against a stone. "Dang it!" I yelled. He released me as I hopped in a circle like a one-legged frog. When the throbbing eased, I stood wobbling and unsteady. He reached out to stabilize me, and I took a hasty step back out of reflex. I almost fell again, but managed to keep my balance and hold the cloak in place. He didn't move closer, but his hand remained outstretched. I gathered my remaining courage, what little was left. I wanted to run and hide from everyone, but the lure of food and drink was strong. I took a hesitant step toward him, and he resumed leading me gently down the path. "Who did this to you?" he asked. "I don't know." I pointed back in the direction I'd come from and tried not to move my lips too much. "I woke up next to some water in a forest back west, before dawn." He stopped, moving to face me with blue eyes that met mine and grew large. His hands gripped my shoulders and he asked, "What water? What did it look like?" "I don't know," I answered, taken aback by his sudden intensity. I jerked away from his grasp. "It had terrible tasting water in it. The forest was creepy. The trees were dead. This forest looks different," I said, gathering the cloak that had fallen open slightly, allowing a crisp wind to claw at my nether regions. He was looking up into the darkening sky, eyes darting from side to side. "You mean the dead spring?" he asked, returning his gaze to mine, eyes still wide. "You came from the dead spring?" "How should I know? If the water there tastes like death, then yes." He shivered. "I was basically dead anyway. Where am I?" He looked puzzled. "As I said before, you're in the Eastern Lands." "The Eastern Lands," I repeated, my eyebrows furrowing. A drop of blood slid down my nose, released by the tiny movement. "Okay, but east of what?" He sighed, smiled faintly with a sideways glance, and held out his arm to me. I flinched again, but he ignored it. "Let's just get you to a fire." A shiver ran through me. Agreed. We walked onward with the sunset painting the sky and streaks of fire behind us, casting a gilded glow over everything ahead. The trees were lively here, colored with the palette of autumn, waving merrily in the breeze. He held me upright, catching me when I stumbled, but leaving me in friendly silence. I was relieved to find that the whole land wasn't like the dark woods I'd first woken in. A thought occurred to me, one I didn't want to speak aloud, but felt I had to ask. Am I dead? He looked down at me and seemed to consider the question. I don't think so, no. Crap. He shivered visibly again, muttering what sounded like a prayer under his breath. His arm didn't move, but I felt him pull away somehow. It was as if he was afraid to touch me. Could I blame him? I had woken up in the moonless dark, in the icy early morning hours, the smell of blood thick around me. I'd lain there playing dead, in case my attackers struck again. I didn't remember being attacked, not exactly, but the evidence was screaming from every slash and broken rib. As I'd lain there, in the dark, flashes of memory had come back to me. It was like standing on train tracks, staring at the oncoming engine, eyes shut tight and waiting for impact. I remembered again now, and it was no less traumatic for being the second time. I had been in a stone room with dozens of black-robed figures surrounding me. My hands were tied to a post. I heard the crack of a brutal whip as it struck my back. It tore furrows through my flesh, blood splashing onto the walls and floor. The robed people were cheering. Some were dancing with delight. I felt an overwhelming sense of evil. Something ancient and deadly with sulphurous breath was hovering above me, but I couldn't bring myself to look at it. A man stood in front of me. I could just see him through the haze of tears, vaguely familiar. He was in a white robe like a priest, holding a crystal bowl in his left hand and a stone knife in his right. He chanted something sinister and swept the knife viciously across my throat, letting the blood spray into the bowl. There was a lot of blood, but I realized that they hadn't severed an artery or I'd already be dead. My head felt dizzy and I began to lose consciousness, but I struggled against it. I had to try and fight, but I was too weak. The entity above me pulsed and grew, getting stronger as I was dying, as if I was somehow connected with it. Each hooded figure drank in turn from the crystal bowl and then passed it down. When the last figure had drained the bowl of my life force and shattered it on the stone floor, they all began chanting together, the sound deeply malicious. They moved closer, hissing and clawing. Some sliced me with their fingernails, some with knives. I screamed, but the noise escaped as only a gurgle through the slit in my throat. The priest came and untied my hands. The release was a small and welcome mercy. I crumbled to the floor. They began to beat me, kicking my face and ribs until I thought each shallow breath would be my last. I wanted to die, wanted it all to be over. I prayed silently for God to save me or kill me, just make it stop. They eventually exhausted themselves, backing away. I uncurled and rolled sideways, lying on my flayed back, ears ringing with a high-pitched whine, staring into the red eyes of the demon hovering near the ceiling. It laughed like the sound of grinding boulders. I hadn't thought it was possible to be even more afraid. I was seized, carried, and thrown into freezing cold water. They held me under, but they shouldn't have bothered. I let myself sink down into oblivion. Death was welcome to take me, an answer to prayer. But I'd seen a light then, a speck of blue that twinkled like a tiny star in the darkness, that began to swirl around me, pulling me through the water. Breath entered my constricted lungs in a ragged gasp as my head breached the surface. Rolling over a ledge of some sort, I felt the impact of my body hitting earth. I could smell dead grass now, as well as blood. When the first rays of dawn had spilled down around me, I'd risen. I'd taken only the briefest look at my reflection in the water, and even that tiny glimpse had shown me that I was grotesque. Shaking my head to be free of that nightmare, I did an inventory of my brain to find it swept clean. My head was totally empty, no clues to be found. Nothing there but throbbing pain. I had no name, no history, no hope. I couldn't remember anything besides my attempted murder. I had been forced upward and emerged from a far different place than the pit within the chamber. Why? I was a leaf on a breeze, cast from the tree and falling, spiraling down into the unknown. My head was dizzy from the trauma of it. There was no strength left in me to fight, no will left even to live. I wanted to know who I was and what was happening to me, but more than that, at the moment I wanted the pain to end. If I had ever taken my identity for granted before, I never would again. I tried in vain to coax any new memories to appear. I bit my lower lip in frustration and was shocked by the pain it caused. My teeth had been kicked through my mouth, apparently. I searched with my tongue and found the tooth-sized slits present on both lips. The lingering tannins from the wine on the open wounds caused my vision to waver and my foot to slip out from under me. I fell, but the man caught me, drawing me back up and pressing on, saying nothing. My energy was gone. He was carrying most of my weight now. Okay, just try to be logical, I thought. I'd woken there, but now I was here. I'd walked with the bucket of nasty water toward the sun, hoping it would be warmer that way. By mid-afternoon, the bucket was nearly empty. My stomach was eating itself, and I just wanted to die. I'd taken the last swallow and looked around for a place to end it all. I had gathered a pile of long dead fallen leaves and curled into them, burrowing down like an armadillo. I'd been surprised by how comfortable it was and how the layers I'd heaped over myself actually helped dispel some of the chill. Not enough, but some. Perhaps that was just the numbness, the illusion of warmth as I froze to death. But sleep, not death, had taken me swiftly. Something new crept into my memory. A swirling wind had whipped up around me, and I thought I'd heard it speak. It had lifted and carried me along the path a few feet off the ground. I had been transported within the bed of leaves, moving quickly, as I'd fallen into a dream. That could have been a part of the dream itself, I thought, but felt that it wasn't. I asked the man, "This may sound crazy, but is it possible that the wind spoke to me?" He paused in mid-stride, pressed his thin lips tightly together, and nodded. "Yes. Well, no, the wind doesn't speak, but wind sprites do. What did it say?" Every step was killing me, but the man resumed walking, dragging me with him. I think it said something like, "I'll take you to find help." Is that even possible? Quite possible. You said the forest looks different now. How so? It's autumn here. It looked like the winter from hell back there. Nothing was alive, not even the grass. I'd walked a long way, but not far enough to escape the dead trees. I recalled the way the wind had howled through the bony branches, arms creaking eerily, as if in worship of the darkness. You must have been in the Central Lands. So, you definitely came through the dead spring. How did you come so far? It's a long way from there to here. I don't know. Interesting. He trailed off in thought. Talking hurt. Thinking didn't feel great either, so I focused on putting one foot in front of the other. The fallen leaves that dotted the path were red, gold, and yellow, like gems that speckled the gravelly trail. I no longer felt the forest's eyes on me, no longer felt death enveloping me, but I still trembled. I still hurt. The man's eyes steadied me. I could feel his gaze boring into the top of my head. He clutched my arm, keeping me from falling as I fumble-footed on. Never mind the dead spring, this strange country, the blasted owl, and this stranger. I only had one question. I shivered from the pit of my hollow stomach and looked ahead, hoping to find the answer hovering in the breeze that lifted my hair. One question. Who am I? If you enjoyed this chapter, please give it a like and/or a comment. It really helps us out. And if you think someone else might enjoy the story, please share with them the first chapter. You'll always find it in the description and pinned in the comments. If you subscribe and turn the notification bell on, you'll be the first to know when the new chapter is released. I'll release one chapter every week until the audiobook is finished.